I'm just now going to hand over to Janine, who is another one of our SIDCN trustees, and she's going to introduce our next speaker, who is the brilliant Vicky from Chance for Childhood, who's going to be talking to us all about ethical storytelling for small international development charities. So over to you, Janine.
Well, thank you, Olivia, and so great to welcome Vicky today. And actually, I joined the session, I think, when you launched the Overexposed campaign, Vicky, and gave me a very long to-do list, which is a really positive thing. I think that's the sign of a practical session with lots of good it's encouraged lots of good thinking internally in our organisation. So I know this is going to be a brilliant session. So Vicky is the head of safeguarding and training and learning for Chance for Childhood, an international NGO working to provide safe spaces and inclusive education for children in vulnerable situations. I mentioned the Overexposed campaign. So Chance for Childhood launched this in September 2022. Really focused on starting discussions around ethical storytelling in the international NGO sector. So Vicky's the campaign director of Overexposed. Previously, she was the chief exec of Small International Development INGO Glad's House, which merged with Chance for Childhood in 2020. So I'm going to hand over to Vicky. Vicky, you should have, with some magic that Amber's doing behind the scenes, you should have control of your slides.
I do. What magic, Amber, that is. That's like super duper magic. That's just happened.
Brilliant.
Brilliant. Thanks, Janine. Thank you, and thanks everyone for having me. I'm with my people today. I know Chance feels like a big organisation, but smalls are in my heart. They're where I started. I was a founder and a CEO of one for a long time, so I'm really thrilled to be here with you. Before we start, I just really want to say that I really believe that smalls will change the way we tell stories in this sector. It won't be UNICEF, it won't be Comic, it will be us. We can drive the change because smalls are adapted. You can adapt quickly, you're closer to the work, there's not layers and layers and layers of decision making. And so I'm really excited to be here with you to share some of my thoughts and my learning and ideas about how to drive this forward. I think like the previous session, like we could do 3 hours. I think we could do 3 weeks on this. So this is a whistle-stop tour. Please put as many questions or reflections in the chat, and let's try and make this interactive and not a lecture, but I am aware it might be a bit of a lecture. So apologies for that. Okay, so just we're not really talking directly about safeguarding, but just to flag that we might be talking about difficult things. So just please take care of yourself if things are a bit uncomfortable. So I want to start, and actually this builds on from the last session around shifting power. Where are we in terms of ethical storytelling? Well, the first thing we have to remember is that we're working in a space that is changing a lot, and the way we tell stories is being looked at in a very different way than it was 10, 15 years ago. We tell stories within the Shift the Power movement. We tell stories within the Black Lives Matter movement. So when we are telling stories of people in other countries of the global majority, we have to think about that in the wider context of what is right and what is ethical in terms of racism, our own anti-racism and the way we tell stories, and how the world is rightly changing. We can't tell stories like we did 20 years ago. Everyone remembers Live Aid with the flies in their eyes and Bob Geldof telling everyone to give him your effing money. That doesn't work anymore because we understand the Shift the Power localization, the dehuman. I'm sorry if there's background. I'm just seeing a comment. I'm sorry if there's background noise. I'm in an open space office, so I'm really sorry if that background noise is distracting. So I'll hold my mic up and hopefully that's better. Yeah, we are working within a localization agenda, and for decades our storytelling has othered the communities that we work in. We have presented them with deficits instead of strengths. We have presented them as powerless instead of powerful. We have presented them as hopeless instead of hopeful. And so when we think about storytelling, we have to think about this wider context of shifting power, of localization, and of anti-racist work. For me, ethical storytelling is at the heart of our anti-racism work. We can't tell negative stories and say we're anti-racist. And that really is the heart of Overexposed for me. I share this slide in every piece of work I do because it's my favorite thing in the whole wide world. And I think it's just when we look at, when storytelling, we're looking at development in this really the elephant in the room that is the UK or international based offices with all of our power and privilege, with our foreign gaze, with our history of colonialism, with our white supremacy, with our patriarchal societies, with our racism, and with our lack of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so this really is personified in our storytelling. This is where all of these values are shown to the public. This is where we are presenting our values, our beliefs, our views. And so this elephant in the room of development, we really have to think about when we're presenting to the public and telling these narratives that are captured within all of these really complicated things that often we feel too uncomfortable to acknowledge and discuss publicly. So, as I said, the way stories are changing, and I just wanted to, there's some really key things that have changed. And comic relief is a big one and a very interesting one for me. I've had many conversations since we launched the Overexposed campaign, and that othering was really called to account, particularly the Ed Sheeran film in 2018, and in the same year, Stacey Dooley with The Child in Uganda, which I'm sure most of you will remember when she put something on Instagram about a child and that family hadn't signed a consent form, and it still pops up occasionally because she says something else. But those ways that stories are told has changed. And also, I know white saviors are going through a really complicated time as an organization right now, but that real public calling out of organizations for othering, for unethical ways of telling stories has really come to the forefront in the way we see the world changing and the sector changing. And I think I think the new world of TikTok as well, where people can, I believe it's called splitting videos, but I might be wrong because I am almost 40, so I don't understand TikTok, where people can really call out your own. And I think that's a really important point when we talk about storytelling, is that often we aren't up to date with the social media. And so we might be being called out by people and we don't even know it. And so again, it brings a layer of complexity to the storytelling. And so, I mean, the Ed Sheeran and Stacey Dooley has seen probably our biggest public-facing organisation, Comic Relief, really have to analyse how they tell stories. And that's been, I think, very difficult for them. And they have all these systems and they have, tens of millions of in place, but even they are starting to pivot. They're not sending celebrities to Africa now. And so as smalls, we can start to make those pivots much quicker. And we can start to think about how we pivot really quickly. So I'd be really interested, you can put in the chat or you can shout out loud. Oh, that sounded weird, sorry, shout out loud. What your key challenges right now are of ethical storytelling. What are your biggest challenges as organizations or as individuals? Anyone feeling brave?
Yeah, I'm happy to be brave.
Yes, well done, Julian. I love someone brave.
One of the challenges I face is that I want to be the one hearing the story. And because I know what sort of questions I want to be asking, and I accept that I'm probably part of the problem in itself. But the stories that I get back from the team in Tanzania aren't workable. And perhaps that's, I need to build up some skills with them to help them with their asking questions for storytelling. But But yeah, without being there, it's quite difficult to get that message out.
Yeah, so that getting the content, getting the right stories, I think is a really important, and one we hear often. Thank you. Claire, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I would say another thing, the challenge would be that to be really broad, but I don't know how much of the world is ready to hear good stories rather than the sob story of little Miss Susie hasn't eaten in 3 days, and actually like, wow, education, look what we can do. And I find that a really big challenge of actually being able to fight for the good story rather than the poor thing.
I had a penny for every time I'd heard that since we launched Overexposed, Claire. I'd have a lot of pennies. Yeah, thank you. Jenny. Oh, is she? Okay, I'll go to Kate while you come off mute. Kate.
Hi. I'm somewhat older than you. I would like to know what, I may not be able to assess that I am speaking in what is now viewed as an inappropriate way. And maybe I would like 3 short questions to ask myself before speaking, as to allow me to, review what I'm about to say. And it is, yes, our marketing team will say, yes, we know the things that actually reach our donors and get them digging in their pockets. And that may not be what you want us to be sharing with people.
Yeah, thank you, Kate. I think that's that checklist. I've just written that down. That's such a really interesting thing. So thank you so much, Jenny and Ellie. And
hi, sorry, microphone issues.
No, you're grand.
We always have 2 problems. One is wording, because we work with kids who are disadvantaged or vulnerable. They're in orphanages and everyone's trying to move away from orphanages. So we always have this problem with wording and justifying where we're going, but then also photos, because everything we do is so visual. It's, being able to use which photos, what's okay to use now, because everything's changing. Everyone wants to see the kid with the spinning plate and the smile on their face, but is it, allowed? This is where I was like, really stumble and don't even know what I'm allowed to show anymore.
Brilliant. Thank you, Jenny, for that honesty. I really appreciate it. And a really important point, that what is the right thing? And that's a really, brilliant. Thank you. Ellie. Is it Elle or Ellie? Sorry, I've embarrassed myself there.
Yes, I've written it in the chat box by accident, but I would say what language to use that kind of upholds the dignity and how the young people identify, because in my experience they often don't identify as poor, but equally that's the words that people in the general public will understand easily. If we start saying socially excluded young people, something like that, which feels more descriptive, it doesn't hit people where we want it to, for them to understand what we're doing.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. And I'm just seeing Caroline's comment about informed consent, and we're coming to this because it is my biggest lifelong obsession / passion / just totally obsessed with it. So we are coming to informed consent, because to me that's the whole crux of this challenge. So thank you, and thank you, Ellie, for that point. And Helen, lastly, and then I'm going to move on because I'm aware of time.
Hi. Sorry, I'm trying to put my video. I'm quite lucky in that I work with our students nearly every day, and so I know the students very well. And when we tell their stories, they tell their stories, not our stories. And I'm also lucky that they're mostly 18 to 21, so it's not the same as working with a young child that doesn't know what they're doing. And we're also trying to empower them to have LinkedIn profiles and become role models for other people. So I went through lots of concerns about, should we be telling their story, should we not? And I now feel I've put that to bed. But then I was I was really disappointed in my most recent trustee meeting when I introduced all the new new students all introduced themselves to the trustees. Literally, we had them on. They introduced themselves and told their stories. And when they'd gone, one of the trustees, who's worked in international development for a long time, said to me, "But you haven't really told me about all the problems they've had."
Oh dear.
And
Yeah.
I felt so gutted, and and that makes me realise that, you know, sometimes they did give a small context of where they come from, but you know, he still wants that hitting thing, and I think that's the problem that a lot of the funders, especially individual funders, want to hear those sad stories.
And I think
that very much.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, and a lot of people are across all of these points have said, "Oh yeah, I'm worried about how people are going to react to it, and people don't get it." And I think it's this: we can be the problem, or we can be the solution, and so we can keep perpetuating this narrative, or we can be bold and brave, and that's really scary to be bold and brave, particularly when we're all small, we don't have a lot of money, and you're like, what if we lose money by changing stories drastically? And I think that's really the crux of everything. And I think it was Ellie said about use of words, it might have been Jenny. We for over a year argued about how to use the word vulnerable. I'm not kidding, like that's how difficult this stuff is. But we had to share the challenges that the children and young people we live in, but how do we do that ethically? So it's really, really important. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about how I view ethical storytelling within power. For me, power, I mean, and I'm head of safeguarding. Safeguarding and power go hand in hand, so we often see things through the lens of power if we're safeguarding practitioners. And I talk about my power pyramid, and I talk about this across all the work I do, and that we sit with this sort of power that in infrastructure where we have the donor right at the top and communities at the bottom, and donors hold power over us, we hold power over our local partners, and then our local partners hold power over communities. And particularly in storytelling, this is the old trope of how we've done it. We've always asked the donors what they want, and we've given them what we want. What I found really interesting since we launched Overexposed is that we've said to donors, we cannot give you pictures of children's faces anymore. And not one of them has said that's not okay. And I'm talking about big funders like UNICEF. We made a video with UNICEF and they didn't put a child's face in the video because we said we couldn't use it. And so I think it's really interesting that we feel, particularly in storytelling, that this power, this pyramid is very ingrained, but actually what we really want to be striving to do long term is flipping that triangle on its head. And we want to give the power to communities and children that our partners work with about how we tell their stories. What do you want us to tell the world about you? And that might be really tricky because when I used to work with homeless children in Kenya, and I said to them, how do you want us to describe you? And they said, we don't want to be street children, we want to be hustlers. But I was like, well, I can't go around calling you hustlers, lads. So we need to think a little bit about this. But it was a co-creation, it was a collaborative thing around finding something that the young people felt strong and powerful with, and we felt confident enough. And so that, and again, this is where small charities come into their own, because you can be in those communities and your partners are in those communities day in, day out. And so you really have an opportunity where you don't have to go through the layers of sign-offs and permissions and heads of comms and heads of strategies and heads of things. Clara, I've just seen your comment and it's brilliant. So I really think when we think about storytelling, we really want to think about flipping this pyramid. We've actually had donors approach us since we launched Overexposed going, this shows your values, and so we want to work with you. We've actually had funders seeking us out. So this old trope of donors want smiling faces. And don't get me wrong, I was absolutely terrified when we launched Overexposed. I thought we were going to lose all our money. And actually turns out that donors really like it, and donors are changing. And that's what we forget, is that behind the scenes, donors are doing the same work as us. they're doing shift the power, they're doing localization, they're talking about anti-racism. And so almost giving them a solution, saying, hey, we're going to tick all the boxes here that you're trying to tick, it's a really exciting thing I'm seeing in the sector. So I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about Overexposed, because we have some resources available to anyone on our website around Overexposed, but I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about where it came from. It came from actually a conversation with a group of young people in Kenya, who then our director of programs went, and our partner said, we won't show children's faces, you can't take photos here. So it came from children and young people in Kenya, and then it built out into our campaign. We decided that we were going to make this change, and we did 2 years of work behind the scenes. And what I would say is that we are not perfect. We are still making mistakes, we are still learning, and we are owning those mistakes, and we are owning that learning as we go away. But we came up with 5 pledges around the values we wanted to underpin in the work that we do in telling stories. And for me, this really captures not just for children and young people, but for adults as well. Like, this is, we've framed it for children, but for me, it's universal. And they're the 5 things that I hope you can all go away, and when you think about your storytelling, can sort of really reflect internally. The first is prioritizing rights and well-being of children. And for me, this is critical, because often when we are asking someone, a child or an adult, to share their story, we are asking them to tell their most traumatic event in their life. We are asking them to relive something really difficult. We're asking them, you know, there was on our webinar, our launch for Overexposed, one of our speakers who's a lived experience advocate for mental health. She's a Rwandan refugee, and she said, Vicky, they took pictures of my pain. And those words, I think about them every single day of my life when I talk about this. And Grace challenges me in a way still. She's an incredible young woman. They take pictures of our pain. And if you take one thing away from what I say today, please take Grace's words. When we tell stories, that is what we are doing. Because we have to, because we need to, because we have to tell stories to get people to support us. But let's think about it in that context. So the rights and well-being, how do we ensure children are talking to people that are safe to them? One of my other big life obsessions is safe adults. Children and young people need, and communities that are vulnerable, experience vulnerabilities, need safe adults. So they should be telling their stories to people that are safe to them, who understand them, who know if they're being triggered or traumatized or re-traumatized. And so we really put that care plan around them before we ask them to share content, before we extract these difficult moments in their life from them and share them all over the internet. We really need to think about, what is this process going to be like for them? What do they need? Are they ready? Can they do this? And some of you, that will be easier depending in the context of your work, what you do. But really, that has to be the heart. Are they capable of doing this? Are we putting them at any harm? Are we really, do they know their rights? Do they know they can say no? Because going back to that power pyramid, think about a child who's been taken off the streets, for example, by your local partner. Those are the adults. Their whole life hangs in the balance of those adults. If they annoy those adults, they can take their whole future away from them. In a child's head, that we might know that they would never do that, but children process things differently. So are you really going to say no to that person? Can you really say no? So really, really think about that. The next is informed consent, and if we have time, we'll come on to that in more detail. It is really complicated, informed consent, and it is an ever-changing being. You don't get someone to sign a form once and they live happily ever after and skip off into the sunset and you can use their picture forever. It's a much more complicated piece of work than just signing a form. If we don't get to that, I will send you the resource hub. There's a whole thing on informed consent in the resource hub, so I will make sure that we get, but I will try and get onto that quickly. We as Chance for Childhood committed to telling positive strength-based language. We do not want to talk about children, young people and communities in a deficit-based approach. We want a strength-based approach. We want to look at their strengths, their hopes, their dreams, their wishes, their resilience, their humour, because people are great. And also thinking about different ways of doing that. So telling stories through practitioners. So really sort of thinking about and not identify, to me, a child is not vulnerable. A child is in a vulnerable situation. They themselves, I don't say, hi, I'm Vicky, I'm vulnerable. I say, hi, I'm Vicky, I live in Leighton, it's a bit dodgy. You know, I'm not vulnerable, but I live in maybe a vulnerable situation because of the context of where I live. If any other Leighton fans out there, sorry, I love Leighton. No offense to Leighton, I do love them. But really thinking about actually how do we phrase that? And we did a huge piece of work in this in Chance for Childhood. We talked to young people and children about how they wanted to be presented. We talked to our local partners about what they thought. We created a document. We sent that to children and young people for feedback. Like, it's not a quick piece of work, but it's, again, you know, co-creation, co-collaboration with communities, and they know what is okay for them and what isn't okay for them. We don't. So really going back, being child-centered and or community-centered in the way you tell stories. Risk is one, obviously, that is really important, and actually we can put a child or person at risk telling the story in a number of ways. That's the process that I spoke about in terms of extracting that story, but also how we share it on the internet. We don't know everything about that child's life. So we're a small local NGO that's working in one community, and we put a child's picture and they've got their school uniform. I always say that to all my friends. I scare the living daylights out of them. I'm like, don't put a picture of your child in their school uniform, because then every Tom, Dick and Harry knows what school your child's at. Again, I work in safeguarding, so I know too much. The internet is the most terrifying place for me. So really thinking about the risk factors of putting that child's story on the internet. And you know, finally, as we've already spoken about, is power and responsibility. We have a responsibility to these children and young people and communities, not just in terms of telling their story ethically, but checking back in that. It's not, again, it's not a one moment thing. It should be a consistent feedback loop. And that is really hard. And don't get me wrong, we have not got that right at Chance for Childhood. I'll be the first to say, for me, it's the hardest bit. You know, we work across really rural communities. Well, how do I get to them to check back with them? But do you know what? I might not have it right, but I'm going to try my absolute damnedest to get it right and to work with my colleagues to try and get it right. So for us, these are the 5 values, and we feel that they capture everything, and we've done a lot of research in terms of what you should be thinking about as an organization when you tell stories. So again, I'll send you the link, but these are all really important talking points, and I've just seen Caroline's point. These are important talking points to be having with colleagues. And we have actually some guided sessions you can do internally to really talk about these issues, not just with children and young people, but also with your partners or colleagues. You'll all be in different makeups with your organizations, but how do you talk to the people on the ground about this as well? What spaces can you create to get to these agreements? And these values look different in every organization. At Chance for Childhood, we decided that we would take all identifiable images of children out of our comms. So we have no faces of children in any of our communications or anywhere. But that's not going to be the right thing for every organisation. But we work with children on the streets in refugee settings, living with disabilities and in conflict with the law. Those are really complicated consent and ethic things. So we were like, okay, and actually we might put them back in when we decide these 5 things, we're absolutely smashing them. So every journey will look different, but I hope that these 5 points will be able to guide some of those conversations that you have internally with your colleagues, with children and young people. And like I said, there is more resource available on a line. I just wanted to show you one picture because I was actually here when this was taken with my head of fundraising. We were like, oh, well, there's still so much to do in the process to getting great photos. But I think this is one of the most beautiful pictures. like the, you know, and there's so much in that picture without having to show you know, a very vulnerable child. She's incredibly vulnerable. She's living with a disability in a refugee settlement. You know, there's a lot, that photo says a lot without having to. So again, and we have some, if you go to our website, you can see if that was a route, again, it's not going to be the route everyone wants to go down, or is right, but, you know, please have a look at our website and social media to see, you know, ways around that real challenge of showing smiling, happy children's faces. I have to say, I have been incredibly positively surprised by the general public and by donors. We had our most successful digital online fundraising campaign this Christmas, and we didn't use a child's face. We raised £75,000 without using a smiling face. So it's, you know, it can be done. It's just a bit more, and our fundraiser and comms would say it's a lot more hard work though, Vicky. But I think for me, it's worth it. So I'm just going to talk a little, I'm going to just give you a whistle stop before of informed consent. Kerry, I've just seen that you've put something in the chat about this, because for me, you get this process right and a lot of the other stuff falls into place for me. So I just wanted to, and again, it's my lifelong obsession / passion. So, so I think often what's really interesting is that informed consent is like, there's no definition, like everyone has kind of a different vibe about it. There's like not one definition for informed consent, which I think really sums up where things start to go wrong. So for me, this comes from a really great website that I really recommend called Photo Ethics, and it's lots of photographers writing blogs, and this is a particularly great blog, but they write with, it's someone, oh, sorry, I need to put my teeth back in. Permission is granted. Person gives permission, and it's full knowledge of where, how, for, and what, and I think, and that they can say no without consequences. And for me, that's the critical bit. You can say no. So I'm going to go into that in a bit more detail about what that really looks like. So for me, there's 6 key points around informed consent. So actually, I'm just going to skip this because it comes out. So the things we really need to say again, can someone really say no? And I will say this till I'm blue in the face, probably will be saying it till the day I die. You have to think about the power dynamics. Can people really say no? You're asking a woman whose child is going to school in your school, and she's, you know, she's got no other option, then can they really say no to you? And who can have that conversation with them where it might be more equal and more meaningful and more trusting? And that's not always the person that you think. So for example, if we have a photographer going to do a photography thing, we would always do consent previously with like field workers. But again, like we just said, even that's really hard. So again, I'm not saying we've got this right, but that for me is like the heart of informed consent. Can they really say no? Who is the person that should be doing this process that they are most likely to feel comfortable with to say no? That might be like your cook, that might be your driver, it might not be, you know, I'm just plucking job titles out of the way, it might not be like the social worker or the head teacher or the comms person. So really thinking about who should be doing the consent process so that they can say no to that person. And that takes a bit of out the box thinking sometimes, because it's like, oh, there's loads, you know, it's particularly in some countries where there's very rigid, you know, hierarchies and structures that we have to work in. Saying to the cook, hey, can you do the informed consent process? We're going to train you to be our informed consent champion. It's quite radical in some places, but really thinking about where that's done. Now, again, this one for me, and you know, I work in a disability and inclusion charity, so we think about inclusion and accessibility wherever we go. But is it really accessible? If I had £10 for every informed consent form I saw that was in English, and none the people that are being asked to give informed consent don't speak English, I would, you know, I'd probably be living in the Maldives by now. So we're asking someone to bear, you know, share their most traumatic moment in their life in a form that they can't read. That's quite a big thing. So how do we make it accessible? So not only who asked them, but what language is it? Is it easy to read? Do they get a copy to take away? Like, they're really simple things, but often, look, I was a frontline worker for 10 years. I've done a lot of shoddy informed consent in my time because I'm busy and you don't think about it. And I'm the first to like hold my hand up and say, I've done all of this the wrong way around. So one thing we're looking at Chance for Childhood, which I'm really excited, we're just about to launch, is informed consent videos. So we're going to get one of our local staff. I've written the script, they are recording it in their local language, and we are going to play it to each person that we ask to take consent for. And there's a number of reasons why that's better. Firstly, it's in their language. Secondly, they can go back and watch it again and again if they need some clarity. Thirdly, there's a standard. When we're busy field workers, frontline workers, we're just reading, okay, can you just sign this? Because we've got loads to do. It's normal, it's natural, we've all done it. But now I know that I can say to our head of comms, I know that every photo we have taken, the same thing is told to someone. I could never say that before. And so, you know, something really simple like that. Use tech, and I'm always saying this with ethical storytelling and safeguarding in general. We've got to use tech better. We've got to use, smartphones are incredible. Let's use them. So can they sign on a digital form? Can we have a Kobo form for their informed to sign? Can we voice note them? Can we, if they've given consent, can we record them saying yes? How do we find, you know, okay, filing securely is a thing, but let's think outside the box about accessibility. People feel embarrassed writing across when they're consenting. So how do we again give them agency in that consent process? So just something really simple that is actually quite workable that we can think about. Something that I think is really important is often, you know, we have to get parental consent. But are we including the child in that parental consent? Are we saying to them, hey, Bobby, mum says it's all right, but how do you feel about like having this photo taken? Because we don't include children because it's parental consent. Oh, they're under 18, so we get parents. But have we asked them? And a lot of, you know, communities, parents, what parents say goes. They don't have, you know. And so are we really are we including the children's voice in that conversation? This one is really important, and we go, oh, it might be used on social media. Well, like I said earlier, I don't understand TikTok. I don't know what TikTok is. I've got an intern at the moment and she gets all her information off TikTok. But I don't even know how to get on it. So how are we going to ask a woman in rural Rwanda if we can share a video about her child living with a disability on TikTok? Like, how can she consent to that? I couldn't consent to having my video on TikTok. So how can we expect someone to consent to something that they don't know, haven't seen, they don't understand? So are we showing them, this is what our website looks like, and your picture will be on there for 1 year, and we get, and I'm really passionate about data and informed consent. So our website last year got 3,000 people on it. So 3,000 people are likely to see this picture. Or our newsletter goes out to 500 people. So 500 people will definitely see it. Tell them how many people are going to see it. Don't just like this mythical being of Instagram. Okay, we've got 800 people on TikTok. And last year, like 3,000 people, so I don't know, whatever the data is, but like, you know, give them, make them informed, you know, the informed bit of consent. It's not just, it'll go on a website. Okay, 500 people are going to see this. And then again, do they understand about, you know, okay, well, it might, but then it might go viral and loads of people might see it. You know, those kids in Uganda that were in Britain's Got Talent's a really good example. Before they went to Britain's Got Talent, they were always popping up on my Instagram. So do they understand that people outside that can see it? Yeah, sorry, I'm just really aware of time. I'm trying to fly through these. Oh, we needed a week, team. Removing consent. We say, oh, you can withdraw consent. Can they really? Because right now, probably you've got an email or a phone number, or speak to Becky, or speak to Julian, or speak to Sarah if you want to withdraw your consent. Well, can they really do that? Have they got an email address? Can they speak the same language as you? Can you speak the same language as them, should I say? Are they really going to contact a white person in the UK and say, hey, pal, can you not use my photo, please? Like, is that really, like, what is the meaningful way that they can do that? Is it, you know, is it, again, is it the cook? Is it the manager of your partner? Again, thinking about power in this. Who can they safely say, I actually don't feel comfortable with this? And who can they access? Is it that you have to have a local WhatsApp number? Okay, it might not ever get used, but you could know that they have that. Can you give them a card when they give consent? This is the number you text if you don't want this anymore. With removal of consent is critical, and it's often an area we don't think about. What do you leave behind when you get consent to tell them how to remove consent? We have little postcards, but again, it's not the right thing. It needs work, and we're thinking about, you know, we're doing the thinking publicly at the moment, which I feel very vulnerable about, but hopefully you can learn through our failures. And then the last one, and then we'll go to questions because I'm aware we're running out of time. Have you explained about losing control of an image? Again, as I said, I work in safeguarding, so I look a lot around online, what we call CSAM, child sexual abuse material and child sexual exploitation. And it's terrifying. The internet is a really, really terrifying place. And I also think with AI, it's even more terrifying. And again, something I don't really understand, but I know that images can be manipulated. So when you put an image of a child online now, it can be manipulated in a way it couldn't be manipulated 5 years ago. There's not enough prison beds in the whole world for the amount of people that want to abuse children online. So sorry to end on a dark note, but like it's an epidemic that, and I'm not saying that will happen to your images, but there's added threats out there now that we're seeing more and more as this dark web and AI and all of these developments take place. But take all of that away. You put an image online, anyone can save it to their desktop and use it in any way they want. In the research overexposed, I talked to an amazing Ugandan organization who had this beautiful relationship with a young person, and they were his only safe adult, and they put a picture of him online, and another organization took it and they told a totally different story about that boy. And he saw it and they lost trust, and he lost his safe adult because they lost control of the image and they didn't explain to him that you can lose control of an image. They can withdraw consent, but they can't fully say, you can't say I've removed all history of that from the internet, because you don't know who's gone on to save it. You don't know where it's gone. And so when we talk about removal of consent, we have to talk about losing control of an image. So they're sort of my key things. I'm sorry, that was a real whistle-stop tour. I feel like I've bombarded you with loads of information and things to think about. As I said, there's loads. Oh, thanks. I've just seen Olivia's put it in the chat. So please, there is more resource there. There is if you go, there's a resource hub which has video explainers, session plans for children and young people, session plans for organizations. Please do reach out to me as well. But does anyone, there's some questions. So shall I go to those? I'm just going to see if...
Yep, do you want to have a little look for you?
Oh, that would be really handy.
I'm just scrolling because there's been a lot.
Sorry.
It's good. It literally, I don't think I've ever used the mind blown emoji so much today, but you've added to the number I have used. So we have, how would you get consent from the mum of the girl in the wheelchair to share that image?
Yeah, so we went through a dual consent process. So what I talked to you about, those 6 steps, and again, like, we are not perfect in this, and we're doing a lot of work on our informed consent process at the moment, but we explained to the mother where it was going to be used, and we did the consent process for her and for the daughter. So the daughter was included in that conversation, even though it's her back. Like, we do the same consent process whether you can see someone's face or not, because they are consenting to the process of having that. Whether you can see them or not, they are still going through the process of sharing their story or having their image. So we would do exactly the same process for a case study, by the way. Like, that's not just for an image. Those 6 pointers are used in every bit of storytelling. And often when we think about informed consent, we think about images, but this is for everything. This is for a quote. We would go through the same process. So again, with the videos, we do one for case studies, one for photos, one for quotes. So yeah, we would go through a dual process with mum and daughter collaboratively around, explaining where that was going to be used. We did it. Actually, myself and our COO were there, and we both speak Swahili, so we did it in Swahili with them and did answered questions backwards and forwards. It took us about half an hour to do the consent for that. So it's not a quick process, but it shouldn't be a quick process because their image is now being seen by lots of people. So we owe them at least half an hour, probably a lot more.
Thank you. Yeah, but very, very fair point. Do you have experience of feedback from people who wish to remove their consent?
Yeah, we have actually. It happened just as I started, and so when I was at Glad's house, we did it a lot because we were constant. And it was much easier because we were much closer to children and young people. So anything we had, we would just check back with them every 3 months, and often they'd say, "Can you take it off?" Actually, so we would just delete the posts where we could, and then where we couldn't, we would take them to we would always talk them through the process of what we were doing. Which is quite, again, a lot of work, but right, because it's their story, not mine. And so, yeah, again, keeping them up to date. Okay, so we've removed this, this, and this. This is where we've had a challenge. This is what I'm doing to face that challenge. So I think it's, again, being very open, but again, it's much easier to go through that process if you've been very clear about losing control of images. If that bit isn't in your consent process, that's when you can lose trust with someone, because you're like, oh yeah, I didn't tell you that I can't take, I just said I'll remove your image, so you think I can take all the images off. That's not real life. So yeah, it's a big process, but I think, again, particularly if you're local partners or if you're in the field a lot, being able to have that ongoing checkbacks. Ideally, I would check back every quarter, but that's hard for some people. Depends what context you are.
So you actively go back, and so
Yeah.
even if you've got the consent,
yeah,
you'll actually go back and say, just to reconfirm.
Yeah, consent is an ongoing process. It's not a one-time we tick a box and do it. You have to go back and go, are you still happy? Because your life's changed, situations change. And particularly if you're working in high-risk areas, it's really important to check back because you don't know what space that person is. So for me, it shouldn't be a one-off thing. It should be an on, particularly if you've got long term. Again, it's going to look different in every context, but how can you put a check back in?
Yeah. I think possibly the example you've given around doing the video, which I think is brilliant. But this says, curious about how to share these ideas with in-country teams. We're on very different stages of the journey in our perspectives on this. It can feel like imposing our values and rules if we can't help them to understand the principles too.
Yeah, so again, it really depends what work you do, doesn't it? But I have to say, this is very much every conversation I've ever had with a local partner. They're the ones driving it. They're the ones that are yeah, you guys have been exploiting us for hundreds of years. Stop it. And so I think it's about, again, going back to power. Often we hold power over our local partners, and so that can be a really difficult conversation to have, acknowledging your own power dynamic in this storytelling requirement. I also think that often phones and things are used differently. Certainly, I work predominantly in Africa, and I think there is a different way of telling stories there that might not be it's different, you know, we might not talk about the ethics of it around, but again, and sort of, and I don't know what conversation you had around decolonization and shifting power, but this sits within that. So if you're having conversations about shifting power, decolonization, anti-racism, this should be sitting within it, because this is your public facing area of how you live that value of decolonization and shifting power. So, and also, you know, you say to a fundraiser here, oh, we're gonna take faces out, and they look absolutely terrified. But we've perpetuated that narrative to our partners for decades. We have literally said to people, we don't believe you're doing the work unless you send us pictures of children. That's literally what we've done for decades. You have to prove to us you are doing this by sending us really normally rubbish photos, let's be honest. So that stuff takes a long time to unpick. This stuff doesn't happen overnight. This is hard work. But photos are the front line of in my view. People are welcome to disagree with me, but the way we tell stories is the front line of that decolonization, of that, no, we don't have power over you. You know, the data is enough. You don't need to send us rubbish pictures of kids in classrooms to prove you're doing the work. And so it's not just about, oh, let's talk about informed consent. It's about, let's talk about this neo-colonial way we are asking you to I'm getting on my high horse, sorry.
Oh, we can have a horse. We need the weak people.
Oh, Amber. Oh, sorry, I just realised I was off on one.
I think that's absolutely fantastic, and I'm really glad you're on your high horse over all this.
Yeah, absolutely. And it actually nicely follows, to be fair, and you know, kudos to Olivia, which is, you know, we have been talking about shifting the power. We have been touching upon decolonization a little bit. I think we definitely, particularly as a board, I think we're quite interested in how we can do that more. And I think one of the reflections is that you've enabled to have a really, I find, especially as being a person of colour, is that how people can feel really uncomfortable about having the opportunity to have this conversation and do it safely, you know, and I feel quite privileged myself. I come from both sides, you know, both sides of parentage and heritage, that, you know, that's like let's have that, you know, and yeah, we will fall and we will stumble and we will, you know, we will make mistakes, but actually creating this space where people like you can share and say, you know, we tried this, I'm a bit wrong, some bits are great, we're still trying to, it's a work in practice, but we're trying, you know. I think that I hope we've kind of created that space today. So it's, you know, I feel like we have, and from what you've shared. So yeah, thank you for that. I'm just sorry, Elle has had her hand up. Apologies, Elle. Over to you.
Hello, sorry, I just wanted to follow up on Caroline's comment earlier, actually. I would love to ask Vicky how she would have handled it in the moment, because it's literally a conversation I had about an hour ago, before this session, with a member of our team, going out to do some evaluations with a group of children who's recently been through a lot of trauma. And I said, if you are taking photos of the children, we're using some facial expression cards in our evaluation with the young people. And I said, can you ask them to choose a card and hold it up in front of their face, because we don't want to show their face. Obviously, we go through the normal consent procedure anyway, and we don't want to show their face. And I got quite a strong pushback from our team member, who's local to the area, in saying, they love having their photo taken. No, we'll just make sure they're smiling. We need to show them smiling. And you then get stuck in that, at which point are you culturally imposing your views on rights, which, you know, in Ethiopia is a very new concept as it is, especially for the team to be taken on. I think raising the word alone was illegal until a few years ago. So at which point are you then culturally imposing on your team versus protecting the child in your view of child protection? I just wonder how you would have, because I did the back down thing. I just said, okay, well, I trust you to make the judgment, and I'd like a better answer.
Yeah, and I think again, it's this isn't like this is a process, this is a journey. use the cliche word of journey, but it is that, you know, this has been 3 years of behind the scenes work at Chance for Childhood to get to this point, because we did have to have those uncomfortable conversations where, you know, yes, children love having their photos taken, but children really understand where they're going? No, so they can't be shared. Like, it's what is the value? What value is it adding to a child's life to have their photo taken versus what value is it taking away? Well, it's putting them at risk. It's, you know, it's all of those things. And, you know, okay, we were in Uganda and we had to take a couple of pictures and then we just deleted them quickly. You know, we deleted them straight away. So the child felt that they'd had their photo taken, because at that moment we were like besieged and we didn't know what to do. And this is real life, and this is people, and people aren't black and white, they're grey, like there's all the grey. And so I think it's about a longer term conversation. I mean, you know, why do what is the value of them taking? But this is the stuff we're worried about, and we are the people that have to present this to the UK, and we are the people that have to back up these decisions. So I need to understand, again, it's a conversation. I need to understand why you're comfortable with this, and I need you to understand why I'm not comfortable with that. And can we find something that we feel underpins these values, or whatever values you want to set, and that we're all happy with? Because I'm not comfortable with this, and you could do, you know, and again, I don't know the makeup of your organization, so it's really tricky. But I think, again, it's like having these are difficult conversations. Anti-racist work is difficult, but where are these pictures going? Where are these photos going? That's the bit. How will we is it okay to put traumatized children on the internet? I personally don't think it is. I think it's really not okay. You know, so, okay, they're doing an evaluation and they want to create a picture. Can we do some co-collaboration? Okay, you want to tell about, what can we do with your hands, kids? What can we do with your feet? Can we create? Can that be part of it? You know, and I didn't talk enough about in this, and I'm sorry, about how we get people to tell their own stories and and that's a really important bit. And, you know, happily do a follow-up workshop because I love talking about this stuff. There we go, you've recorded me saying that. You know, how do we flip it? So
great.
Sorry,
Great. Sorry to stop the conversation there, Vicky. It has been an incredible session. I'm just aware of time.
I know, so I put my email in the chat.
I think based on the conversation and the questions, I think we'll definitely take you up on your offer for a feedback for a follow-up session.
Great.
To be honest, I mean, I've just been blown away by the whole day today. I think pretty much every single session we've had today, we could have carried on. Vicky's kindly put her email address in the link, so if you haven't had the opportunity for Vicky to answer your question, I'm sorry we've run out of time. But so Vicky's kindly put her email address in the chat, so do feel free to message Vicky directly with your questions. I've also put a link in the chat to the Chance for Childhood website and the Overexposed campaign. Vicky is also on the SIDCN Facebook group as well, so you can also join her over there. But yes, thank you so much, Vicky. That's been
an absolute pleasure. Thank
valuable.
you.
It's been amazing. And there's a lot of love for you in the chat.